Hello everyone, so welcome to week 16, the final week of the semester. So before we get into the lecture, I'd like to talk about the final exam assignment, which is due this Friday. And I suggest that you get started right away because this is going to take quite a bit of time. I'm expecting you to spend 4 to 6 hours working on creating an artwork and also writing about it. So if you leave it for like Friday afternoon, you might not get done on time, and I will not give you. I just can't give you an extension on this assignment. So make sure to finish it as soon as possible. You can't. I mean, and if, like your computer broke down, your unstable internet. I can't. Because the grades are due, so I won't be able to. Those excuses are not going to work. So I suggest that get it done as soon. Like sometime around Thursday night, so that you have some time if you face like a technical difficulties. So like I said, one more time, I will not be giving you extension, so make sure to submit it on time. And another thing is the extra credit assignment. So if you are looking to participate in that, make sure to submit it on time as well. And also there's an assignment for sculpture, which is, I believe that is due this Wednesday. I'm not too sure, but sometime this week, so make sure to submit that as well. And also check your grades and see if there's any irregularities there. So if there is, just send me an email. But when you're sending me an email, be polite about it. Just state your business, be professional about it. So I've been getting a lot of emails, just such as like, hey, I submitted this assignment on that day, and that's it. And like, what am I supposed to do with that, right? So in that case, I will not respond to that email at all. So if you don't know what the professional business email is, just Google it, follow it. I think it's a good life lesson. You must use that for any kind of interaction between two professionals. So follow that rules. And what other things? I guess that's it. So this is going to be the last lecture, and this is going to be on photography. I was saying lens-based media because photography and video film is kind of a similar topics. And yeah, so if you have any questions, or if you have any concerns about your grade, send me an email as soon as possible. Like I said, be professional, use the professional email format. Otherwise, I'm not going to respond it, because I am responding a lot of emails at this time, grading a lot of assignments as well. So if you don't follow the format that I'm telling you guys to use, I'm just not going to respond it or grade it. Another thing is the late work assignment. So if you have any late work that you want to submit, make sure to use the link that we have for the week 16, and make sure to name your assignment, because if you don't name it, I'm not going to like I said, if you don't indicate which assignment it is, I'm not going to grade it. So alright, so if you see make sure to do that, and because you don't want to get a 0 for not writing your name or indicating which assignment it is. So let's get right into it. So this week we're going to talk about photography. So photography, camera more specifically, is a relatively new piece of equipment if you consider how long the history of art is. So the camera relies on a natural phenomenon known since ancient Greek times, actually. The light reflected from an object can project an image of that object onto a surface. So however, it was not until 19th century that a way was found to capture and preserve such projected image. So with that discovery, photography was born, and after photography, film and video, which recorded the projected image in motion over time. So the forerunner of the camera was the camera obscura, a dark chamber or room with a hole in one wall through which images of objects outside the room were projected on the opposite wall. So the principle was probably known to the Chinese and to ancient Greeks such as Aristotle more than 2,000 years ago. And late in 16th century, the Italian scientist and writer Giambattista della Porta demonstrated and described in detail the use of camera obscura with a lens. So here it is the basic principle of how camera obscura works without a lens though. Thing goes here. So that's the way that how camera obscura works. Dark room, small hole, and reverse image is projected onto this wall. So you can make a camera obscura yourself. So find a light tight room, even a closet or very large cardboard box. And if you pierce a small hole no bigger than maybe the diameter of a say a pen or pencil in one wall of the room to accept the light into the dark room. So inside, hold a sheet of paper a few inches from the hole, and you will see an image of the scene outside the room projected on the paper, upside down rather blurry, but say recognizable. So modern day camera uses the same principle, but with just the lens. There you go. Lens on top of this hole. So camera even today uses this same principle, and it is no different in theory from that of the camera obscura. So camera is a light tight box with an opening at one end to admit light. So instead of a hole, a lens is used to focus and refract the light, and a light sensitive surface to receive the light image and hold it. So this is the lens and this is the hole, but in this case, modern camera uses the lens to focus the light, and then this film or sensor is used to capture that reflected image. So the last of this process, the capturing that image and then preserving that image, the holding of the image was the major drawback of the camera obscura. Because you can see, but you can't capture that projected image inside of the camera obscura. So it could project an image, but there was no way to preserve that image, and much less walk away with it in your hand. That was it. So a lot of people did it when trace it with the piece of pencil or graphite to use it as like a drawing aid, but you can't. You weren't able to just walk out of that room with like a finished photography. So it was to this end that a number of people in the 19th century directed their attention to this camera obscura and all this technology. So daguerreotype, first successful form of photography, named after its inventor Louis Daguerreau of France, who invented the technique in collaboration with Nicholas Niepce in 1830s. So in contrast to photographic paper, a daguerreotype is not flexible and is rather heavy, and each daguerreotype is a unique image of a silver copper plate. So the daguerreotype is accurate, detailed, and very, very sharp, considering how old this technology is, and it has a mirror-like surface and is very fragile. So instead of using a paper or film which we are used to, daguerreotype is basically exposed onto a silver coated copper plate. So it's basically a piece of metal, but the silver coating tends to be a little fragile. So since the metal plate is extremely vulnerable, most daguerreotypes are presented in a special housing. So different types of housings existed. So such as an open model or folding case or jewelry box and etc. The numerous portrait studios opened their room from 1840 and onward. Daguerreotypes were very expensive, so only the wealthy and could afford to have their portrait taken. So even though the painting portrait was the most popular subject, the daguerreotype was used to record many other images. Images such as topographic and documentary subjects, antiquities, still lifes, and natural phenomena or an event. So let's take a look at how daguerreotype works.
Daguerreotypes were direct positive, unique photographs made not on paper, but made on sheets of copper that had been silver plated. The first stage was to make sure the plate was totally clean, free of dust, grease, and highly polished. These devices called buffing boards were used. So you would take the plate and you would rub it vigorously until it was shining and polished like a mirror. The next stage was to make the plate light sensitive. To do this, you used one of these devices called a sensitizing box. Inside here there are two ceramic dishes You would place a solution of iodide in one, place the polished daguerreotype plate on the surface, remove the glass plate so the vapours from the iodine would react with the silver to make a layer of silver iodide, and silver iodide was light sensitive. You would expose it for possibly up to 15 or 20 minutes until it was then ready to place in the camera to make your exposure. You would place the sensitized plate in a plate holder similar to this. You would place this into the back of your camera, and then you would make your exposure, normally by just removing the lens cap and waiting for the necessary length of time. After exposure in the camera, there was no visible image on the plate. It was an invisible or latent image. That had to be made visible by exposing it to further chemical treatment. For daguerreotypes, mercury was used. This is a daguerreotype developing box. You would place the exposed plate face down in the top of the box. In the bottom of the box is a tray of mercury. You would place a spirit lamp underneath. It would heat the mercury vapour rises and then reacts with the silver on the surface of the plate to create an amalgam which forms the visible daguerreotype image. The next stage, you had to fix the plate to make sure that it didn't continue to darken when it was exposed to light. In order to do that, you filled a tray like this with a solution of sodium thiosulfate, hypo. You would then place the plate in the solution, agitate it, and that would wash away any of the unexposed silver iodide on the surface. When the plate had been fixed to prevent it from darkening further, it was then washed and ready for the last stage, which was known as gilding. This is a gilding stand. You would place the plate on the top, light the spirit lamp to warm the plate, and then you would pour a solution of gold chloride. And as that evaporated with the heat, it would strengthen the image and protect it. It would bring out the image and improve it. Finally, you would remove the plate again, wash it in distilled water, and when it was dry, it was ready to be placed into a protective case, such as this one, for viewing. Whilst it was capable of making good results, it had a major drawback. There were direct one-off positives. If you wanted multiple copies, you either had to photograph the subject again or re-photograph the daguerreotype. As opposed to the daguerreotype, Talbot's process of the negative-positive meant that with one negative you could create as many positive copies as you wished. It was with Talbot's process, the negative-positive process of photography, that the future of photography lay. By the early 1860s, hardly anyone was making daguerreotypes any longer.
Alright, so that was daguerreotype. So yet, despite of all this early success, the daguerreotype was ultimately a dead end for photography. So the process produces a positive image, an image in which light and dark values appear correctly. And this image is unique and cannot be reproduced, and the plate is photographed and you can't reproduce anymore. So the future of photography instead lay with technology that produced a negative image, one in which light and dark values were reversed. And in this case, the negative could be used again and again to create multiple positive images on light-sensitive paper. So instead of a single precious and delicate object, which is daguerreotype, photography found its essence as an art of potentially unlimited and low-cost multiples. So despite finding the cheap way to reproduce multiples, the long exposure time and bulky equipment of early photography meant that a photograph was still a special occasion, an occasion for standing still. But by the 1880s, however, a technical advancement has reduced exposure time to a fraction of a second, allowing cameras to capture life as it happened without asking it to pose. So then in 1888, an American named George Eastman developed a camera called the Kodak that changed the photography forever. So unlike early cameras, the Kodak was lightweight and handheld, which meant it could be taken anywhere. Saw with the slogan saying, "You press the button, we do the rest." The camera came loaded with a new invention, a roll of film, enough for 100 photographs in this rather small package. So users simply took the pictures and sent the camera back to the company, and they developed and printed the photographs were returned to them along with their camera, reloaded with film. One way in which photography changed the world was in the sheer quantity of images that could be created and put into circulation. So whereas a painter might take weeks or even months to compose and execute a scene of daily life, a photographer could produce dozens of such scenes in a single day. But what purpose could this facility be put to? And what was the advantage of quantity and speed? One earlier answer was that photography could record what was seen as a history unfolded, or preserve a visual record of what existed for a time. So we could call these purposes bearing witness and documenting, and they continue to play important roles today. So this is probably one of the most significant and iconic photograph of all time, Dorothea Lange's My Grandmother. Some of you have probably seen this picture. So let's take a look at who she was and what she was doing and how this photograph was created.
(1933), the depths of the Great Depression. Almost 25% of the American labor force, more than 13 million people, out of work. Dorothea Lange, a studio portrait photographer in San Francisco, was so moved by the jobless and homeless in local breadlines and soup kitchens that she began making street portraits, showing in stark black and white what the shortage of work and hope was doing to people who were too often and too easily unseen and overlooked. By the fall of 1935, Lange was working for the government's Farm Security Administration, documenting migrants from the Dust Bowl, masses of sharecroppers, tenant farmers, and their families, traveling in wheezing, overpacked motor cars between work camps and shantytowns. I am trying here to say something about the dispirited, the defeated, the alienated, said Lange, about the wounded, the crippled, the helpless, the rootless. Lange had personal empathy for the physically disabled. She walked with a deep limp, the result of childhood polio, which Lange said was perhaps the most important thing that happened to me. It helped her see in the migrants, as she said, things that were more important than how poor they were: their pride, their strength, their spirit. No photograph shows that better than Migrant Mother, an iconic Lange photograph, sometimes called the Mona Lisa of the Depression. Part of a sequence of shots Lange made in a California pea pickers camp in 1936. The image is a still photograph, yet deeply moving. The woman's face is layered with emotions: exhaustion, endurance, despair, dignity. Flashes of the human condition are in frame after frame of Lange's work: the value of family, of community, of a sense of home, and a sense of humor. Photography, said Lange, takes an instant out of time, altering life by holding it still. A photographer could alter a viewer's life in profound ways. You have the power to increase his perceptions and conceptions, said Lange. Lange tried to do that on a national scale in her work documenting the forced relocation of Japanese Americans to armed camps after the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941. She was deeply moved by the patience, the forbearance of the internees, more than 100,000 held at internment camps, many of them children. Lange's photos also stood as evidence of the poor conditions that many African Americans suffered at the time, due in part to racial discrimination and injustice. Despite long and frequent bouts with illness, Lang worked as a documentary photographer through the 1950s into the 1960s. She died in 1965 at the age of 70. She had tried, she said, for a visual life, an enormous undertaking practically unattainable. I have only touched it, she said, just touched it. Today, Lang's photographs of the 1930s stand as dramatic records of the human costs of the Depression, as well as the dignity and the strength that helped Americans survive.
All right, that's Dorothea Lange. All right, so now let's talk about the photography as an art. So the development of photography has been seen as a freeing painting and sculpture from practical tasks such as recording appearances and events. And it is certainly true that Western artists began to explore the potential of abstraction and non-representation only after photography was well established. So Pablo Picasso, I remember once saying that photography didn't kill the painting, it freed the painting, meaning that the painters were no longer was bounded to recreating visual scenes. So today, over 150 years later, photography is fully integrated into the art world of museums and galleries, and many artists who are not primarily photographers work with photographic images. And this brief section looks at how photography found its way both as an art and into art. So let's take a look at Alfred Stieglitz, an American photographer who pioneered pictorialism, an approach that emphasizes beauty of subject matter, tonality, and composition rather than just documentation of reality, which was mostly Dorothea Lange's focus. So pictorialism has a huge impact on the photography itself. So today, when you take Instagram shots, you are thinking of this approach of pictorialism. So you're not just documenting, but you want to make your photos look good. So all that notion has to do with is related to pictorialism.
We're in the LACMA Study Center for Photography and Works on Paper, looking at probably one of the most important photographs of the 20th century, The Steerage by Alfred Stieglitz.
He came upon this image on a trip with his wife and daughter. They were not coming to America, but rather going to Europe. They were lucky enough to be in first class. This image is of the steerage, where the cheapest seats would be. So these are not, as it's often perceived, immigrants coming to America, but actually Europeans, some rejected at Ellis Island, some who came just on a worker visa.
This has come to symbolize the experience of immigrants at the beginning of the 20th century, and even the figure wearing a shawl has been understood as a Jewish figure wearing a prayer shawl. None of that is true.
Analyzing a photograph has many other layers, perhaps, than traditional painting, where you know that that image came from the artist's mind. So this image, in the same way, came from the artist's mind. There's some ambivalence, I think, on his part about where he fit in this scenario as a first-generation German Jewish American.
So at the bottom of the image, we see the steerage, above an observation deck that includes all types of people. And it's clear from Stieglitz's later writings that he did feel somewhat ambivalent about traveling first class. He didn't grow up in circumstances that would have allowed him normally to travel that way, and seemed to have felt stifled by it, and left that part of the ship to seek out different kinds of people in different circumstances. We do have this sense of this modern world of people of all types coming together, of movement, of immigration. And yet, when Stieglitz talked about this image, he tended to emphasize the formal aspects of the photograph, the relationship of the shapes and lines to one another, and not the subject matter, the very thing that has drawn so many of us to it.
That goes to his role as one of the fathers of photography. He really put this image out there. He was the one who was successful in making it appear in numerous magazines beyond its first iteration in his own journal, Camera Work. This was a very influential photography journal, pushing forward the doctrine that photography could be fine art.
Stieglitz himself said that if all my photographs were lost and I'd be represented by just one, the steerage, I'd be satisfied. So what is it about this that meant so much to Stieglitz, who had such a long and important career?
It was a turning point for him from pictorialist photography into modern photography. Pictorialism was a term that was used by photographers practicing at the same time who wanted their work to be accepted as fine art, but leaned on painting and drawing. Photographers were trying to blur the edges, have wonderful additional toning, so that it looked like everything other than a photograph. Stieglitz is ready to move on and to embrace all the inherent wonderfulness that comes through the camera. By having a mechanical tool as your device, photographers were for a long time not considered fine artists.
Modern life being characterized by the machine and not turning away from that, but embracing it.
This is not a direct quote, but he would have said that the camera was the device to be used to document modern life.
Stieglitz was especially interested in that oval shape of the straw hat.
That directs you, but you start to see that geometric shape repeat, and then you start to see other geometric shapes repeat. It's satisfying for the eye, but it simultaneously does represent the swirl of modern life. Everything's moving faster. People are going back and forth from one continent to another regularly enough that we have something called the steerage, and the pace of life is different. So the pacing within a composition changes too.
It's important to remember that he saw this, recognized it as a compelling composition that said something that he wanted to say, went to his cabin, got the camera, came back, and took this photo.
His heart just beat faster, hoping when he came back that the specific start point in the composition, the straw hat at the upper deck, was still going to be in place.
This is such an important photograph in the history of American photography, and it's no surprise that contemporary artists look back to it and do their own versions of it.
One of those photographers who's tackled this iconic image is Vic Muniz. Started his career reappropriating existing imagery and making us look at it anew. He would work with materials such as dirt, dust, gold.
And here, chocolate sauce.
Which can represent the darks and the lights of photography.
And so he's doing this as a performance, remaking this work in an odd medium, and then photographing it.
Muniz is doing that kind of tongue-in-cheek, but also to point out the fact that photography has inherent mutability. The truths that are in photographs can constantly be questioned.
Is this Alfred Stieglitz? And let's take a look at a little bit more modern use of photography as art. So let's take a look at Cindy Sherman. I think her work is very interesting.
I'm Roxana Markoc, Senior Curator of Photography at the Museum of Modern Art. This is the Untitled Film Stills. It is a photographic series by artist Cindy Sherman that she made between 1977 and 1980. I find this work fascinating in so many ways, and it has to do also with the genesis of the work. When Sherman was just a child, she loved to play, dress up, and in fact she would construct all these elaborate costumes out of a trunk of old clothes, many of which belonged to her great-grandmother. So in 1977, Cindy Sherman begins her Untitled Film Stills, in which she is impersonating this encyclopedic roster of female roles from movies, both Hollywood and European art house, that we feel we must have seen. If we look at a few of them, for instance, right here she plays the young career girl in the big city against these skyscrapers, while here she is the chic starlet at her seaside hideaway, trying to keep away from the camera of the paparazzi. And in a few others, such as here or in these pictures, she plays the very tough yet vulnerable film noir idol. During this time, she is constantly reading about film and film theory, and she's also attending many screenings at the legendary Bleecker Street Art Cinema, where she learns about the work of various auteur filmmakers, such as Jean-Luc Godard and Michelangelo Antonioni. And in fact, I should point out one of my favorite of the film stills, although I love so many of them, is this one. It is based on a Brigitte Bardot type. And as you can see, she's wearing this headscarf. It's very similar, in fact, to the one that Bardot sported herself in Godard's movie Contempt, or Le Mépris in French, from 1963. But what I find truly of interest is how she's enfranchising this woman character. Rather than portraying her as a sex symbol, she's portraying her as an intellectual. She's surrounded by books, she's a librarian, something that obviously none of the male directors would have given the real Bardot. I would say that this is one of the most consequential bodies of works in the history of contemporary art. I think that why this body of work is so important is because it really happens at a certain moment when we have an explosion in visual culture, of magazine, of films, of advertising, which begs in a certain way the question of how mass media representations inform our perceptions of ourselves and our understanding of the world around us.
Alright, so that is it for this week's lecture. Well, actually, this is the final lecture because I only want to give you guys just one lecture this week because I want you guys to spend spend time on your final exam assignment, which is going to take quite a bit of time. So I suggest that you get started right away. And yeah, so this is really final lecture. So I hope that you guys learned something from this course. It was very interesting teaching this class online. This was my first time teaching online class, so there was things that I wish I've done differently, but I think I've learned a lot while I was teaching this class. So and some of the assignments I wanted to be a little bit more ambitious, but given that the limitation of this course delivery method, I want things that I wasn't able to do, things like that. So but still, I hope that this class was helpful, maybe made you appreciate art more. Well, I'm not too sure. So if you have any questions on any kind of a assignment or anything like that, just send me an email. And yes, well, this is bye-bye. I never know how to say goodbye, so I'm just gonna stop recording now. All right, good luck, guys.